Lucy gripped the steering wheel. Her knuckles were white. The road was dark. The trees seemed to reach out like claws. She was going to the old Blackwood Manor. Everyone said it was haunted.
Lucy wasn't sure she believed in ghosts, but there was something creepy about the manor. Even in the daylight, it looked sad and forgotten. She was meeting her friends there. They dared her to come.
As she drove, fog began to swirl around the car. It was getting hard to see. Lucy shivered. Why did she let her friends talk her into this?
The car crawled up the long driveway. The headlights flickered on the overgrown bushes. Then the mansion loomed out of the fog. It was even creepier up close.
The front porch sagged. The windows were dark like empty eyes. Lucy turned off the engine. Silence pressed in around her. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment she considered just driving away, but her friends would laugh at her. She had to go in.
Taking a deep breath, she opened the car door and stepped out into the fog. The front door creaked open as if it hadn't been touched in years. The air inside was stale and cold. It smelled like dust and decay. Lucy stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the silence.
The foyer was huge and dark. Cobwebs hung from the high ceiling. A grand staircase swept up to the shadows above. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Lucy shivered. She wished she had brought a flashlight. The only light came from the moon shining through the grimy windows.
Lucy wandered through the mansion, her hand brushing against the dusty walls. The air was thick with the scent of decay and neglect, each step she took echoing through the empty halls. She had always been drawn to places like this, places with history, with stories hidden in every corner. Today she was on a mission to uncover one such story. Each room was emptier and darker than the last. The windows were covered in grime, allowing only slivers of light to penetrate the gloom. Cobwebs hung like delicate lace from the ceilings, and the floors creaked under her weight. It was as if the house itself was whispering secrets to her, urging her to delve deeper into its mysteries. She found a library with shelves full of books. The room was different from the others, almost as if it had been preserved in time. The air was musty, filled with the scent of aged paper and leather. Lucy felt a sense of reverence as she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the rows of books that lined the walls. But the books were old and crumbling. Many of them had spines that were cracked and pages that were yellowed with age. She ran her fingers gently over the covers, feeling the texture of the worn leather and the brittle paper. It was clear that these books had not been touched in decades, maybe even centuries. Some looked like they were hundreds of years old. Titles in languages she couldn't understand, scripts that seemed almost otherworldly. She wondered who had read these books, what knowledge they had sought, and what secrets they had uncovered. The library felt like a portal to another time, a place where the past and present converged.
Then she saw it. A glint of something out of place caught her eye. She turned slowly, her heart beginning to race. There at the far end of the library, partially hidden in the shadows, was a portrait. At the far end of the library, a portrait hung on the wall. It was large, dominating the space around it. The frame was ornate, gilded with intricate designs that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The painting itself was dark, the colors muted by time. It was a man in a dark coat, his face half in shadow. His eyes were piercing, almost as if they were looking directly at her. There was something unsettling about the way he was depicted, a sternness that made her feel uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the portrait was watching her. As Lucy stared at it, she could have sworn the man's eyes moved. It was just a flicker, a brief moment where she thought she saw the eyes shift. Her breath caught in her throat and she took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. She blinked and the movement was gone. The eyes were still, fixed in their stern gaze. She let out a shaky breath, trying to calm herself, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold shiver running down her spine. "It's just the shadows," she whispered to herself, her voice shaky. She tried to convince herself that it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks on her. But the words felt hollow, and the fear gnawed at her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the pages seemed amplified in the silence. She glanced around nervously, her eyes darting to the shadows, half expecting to see the man from the portrait step out of the darkness. The mansion, once a place of curiosity, now felt like a trap, and Lucy knew she had to leave before the shadows consumed her.
As Lucy explored further, she began to hear whispers. They were faint, like the rustle of silk dresses and the murmur of voices from long ago. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once.
Hello?
She called out, her voice echoing in the empty halls. But there was no answer, only the soft, eerie whispers. They seemed to be getting louder now, surrounding her.
Oh no.
Lucy felt a cold hand on her neck. She screamed and whirled around. There was nothing there, but the whispers seemed closer now, colder, angrier.
Join us, join us. Never leave, never leave.
I need to get out of here. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, and every shadow seemed to move with a life of its own. My heart raced as I sprinted down the corridor, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the ancient walls. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me, urging me to run faster.
Lucy stumbled back into the library, her heart pounding. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering candle on a distant table. Dust particles danced in the air, illuminated by the weak glow. She could hear the faint creaking of the old mansion settling, each sound amplifying her fear. She needed to get out of there. The library, once a place of knowledge and refuge, now felt like a prison. The towering bookshelves seemed to close in on her, their shadows forming menacing shapes. She glanced around anxiously, searching for an escape route, but the labyrinth of bookshelves offered no clear path. But as she turned to leave, she noticed a book lying open on a table. It was as if the book was waiting for her, calling out to her in a silent whisper. The cover was worn, and the pages seemed to glow with an eerie light. It was bound in ancient-looking leather, its pages yellowed with age. The leather was cracked and brittle, and the pages were filled with strange symbols and writings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. She felt an inexplicable urge to touch it, to open it and uncover its secrets. She leaned closer, drawn in by the book's strange energy. Her fingers brushed against the cover, and a jolt of electricity shot through her. The room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows deepened. She could hear a faint whispering, as if the book was speaking to her, urging her to read its contents. It was a diary, filled with spidery handwriting. Lucy began to read. The words seemed to come alive on the page, forming vivid images in her mind. She could see the events unfolding as if she were there, experiencing them firsthand. The handwriting was elegant yet eerie, each letter meticulously crafted. It was the story of the man in the portrait. His eyes seemed to follow her as she read, and she could feel his presence in the room. The diary detailed his life, his ambitions, and his descent into darkness. He had been a man of great power and influence, but his heart was filled with malice. He had lived in the mansion centuries ago. The mansion, once a grand and opulent estate, had become a place of sorrow and despair. The walls were filled with secrets, and the air was thick with the weight of past tragedies. Lucy could almost hear the echoes of the past, the laughter and the screams. He had been a cruel man, full of hate and darkness. His actions had left a stain on the mansion, a darkness that lingered long after his death. The diary spoke of his cruelty, his unrelenting quest for power, and the fear he instilled in those around him. The mansion had become a reflection of his soul, dark and foreboding. The diary spoke of a terrible tragedy that had befallen the mansion. The words painted a picture of horror and despair. The mansion had been a place of joy and celebration, but it had all come to a tragic end. The diary hinted at a curse, a darkness that had consumed the mansion and its inhabitants. A fire, screams, a disappearance. The words were chilling. Lucy could almost hear the crackling of the flames, the desperate cries for help. The diary described the night of the fire in vivid detail, the chaos and the terror. It spoke of a disappearance, a mystery that had never been solved. The mansion had been left in ruins, a haunting reminder of the past. Lucy felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The more she read, the more she felt the weight of the mansion's dark history pressing down on her. She could feel the presence of the man in the portrait, his eyes watching her every move. The diary had unlocked something within the mansion, a darkness that was now reaching out to her. She clutched the book tightly, her hands trembling. She knew she had to leave, but the book's grip on her was strong. The secrets it held were too powerful to ignore, and she was now a part of its story.
Oh no!
Suddenly, the library door slammed shut with a deafening boom. Lucy jumped back, her heart racing. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She was locked in. Panic surged through her. The whispers were louder now, swirling around her like angry bees. She could feel their icy breath on her skin. The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavy with unseen menace. Then she saw them. Shadows were gathering at the edge of the light. They twisted and writhed, taking on grotesque shapes. Faces formed in the darkness, eyes glowing with an eerie light. The ghostly apparitions were closing in.
I have to get out of here. This place is suffocating me and I can't take it anymore. Every second I stay, I feel the walls closing in.
Lucy screamed and ran to the window. The storm outside was raging, with lightning illuminating the old mansion in brief, terrifying flashes. She could feel the oppressive atmosphere of the house bearing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She threw it open and squeezed through the narrow opening. The window was barely wide enough for her to fit, but desperation gave her the strength to push through. The cold wind and rain hit her face as she struggled to get out. She landed on the soft ground outside. Scraping her hands on the rough stone, the pain was sharp, but it was a small price to pay for her freedom. She could feel the wet earth beneath her fingers, grounding her in reality. She didn't waste any time. The fear of being caught propelled her forward. She got up quickly, her heart pounding in her chest, and started running. The storm was relentless, but it was nothing compared to the terror she felt inside that house. She scrambled to her feet and ran. The overgrown garden was like a maze, with branches and thorns snagging at her clothes and skin. But she didn't care. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between her and that cursed place. She could hear the whispers behind her, urging her on. They were faint but persistent, like ghostly echoes in the night. Every time she looked back, she saw shadows moving, as if the house itself was alive and reaching out to pull her back. They were angry now, furious that she had escaped. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its windows like eyes watching her every move. The shadows inside writhed and twisted, a manifestation of the dark forces that dwelled within. Lucy didn't stop running until she reached her car. Her lungs burned and her legs felt like they were about to give out, but she pushed on. The sight of her car was a beacon of hope in the stormy night, promising safety and escape. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. The rain made it difficult to get a good grip, and her panic only made things worse. She could feel the presence of the house behind her, like a dark cloud looming over her shoulder. Finally, she got the door open and tumbled inside. The interior of the car was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. It was her sanctuary, a small space where she could catch her breath and gather her thoughts. She slammed the door shut and locked it as if the shadows could follow her. The sound of the lock clicking into place was a small comfort, but she knew she wasn't safe yet. The house might be behind her, but its dark influence lingered in her mind. As Lucy sped away from Blackwood Manor, the fog seemed to part for her, as if some unseen force was granting her safe passage. She glanced back at the mansion, its dark silhouette receding into the distance. And then she saw it. In the rearview mirror, for just a fleeting moment, she saw him, the man from the portrait. His eyes met hers, cold and menacing. Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows.
I won't look back.
Lucy didn't slow down. She didn't look back. She knew with a chilling certainty that Blackwood Manor and its secrets would forever haunt her dreams.